I have to laugh at this point. Two things. We're, of course, as I predicted, we're starting to see the perma bears calling for the end of the bull market and, um, the next depression, and that this is going to be worse than the last bear market. Again, these people will be wrong like they continue to be wrong for 10 years. This is not the end of the bull market because it's not the end of the innovation uh, phase. The innovation phase is still fairly young. We've got at least another 10 years to go. I'm also seeing people starting to take credit for calling the crash, which of course is um, complete nonsense. The only person that was calling a crash that I know of was me. Um, just typical how people sell their newsletters is after the fact they claim to have made perfect calls on tops and bottoms, and the reality, of course, is that none of these people ever do that. It's just a marketing technique to sell their newsletter. But I'm on public record. I've been warning that this was coming for several weeks. I've told you why it's coming. It's because the Fed prevented the market from correcting right here when it should have. The market was trying to roll over and start discounting the coronavirus right here, and we got this plunge protection team intervention and this sharp V-shape um, rally back up, and then tried again to correct here, more intervention, and in the process they just stretched the market way too far above the long-term moving averages, and no amount of market intervention or QE is going to have any effect on the virus. It's going to continue to spread until uh, the winter ends and spring begins and temperatures start to warm up. And so the market had no choice. And of course, this stretched this intermediate cycle out to very mature. I believe we were at 36 weeks right here, which, as I pointed out before, forces the correction to be compressed into a very short time frame. So these market interventions, you'd think these people would learn from their mistakes, but apparently they are never going to learn. These market interventions are what cause these kind of things. They prevent the market from trying to correct naturally like it should, and they force the correction to compress into a very short time frame at the very end of the cycle. So this is exactly why we are getting this. It's you know um, completely due to the market intervention that was preventing the market from doing what it was supposed to do. So, as I stated in my video yesterday, we had to see whether or not the market could bounce off this 200-day moving average, and it did not. The selling accelerated into the close um, yesterday, and now we're, Friday. There's no natural scenario where the market can bottom ahead of the weekend. Nobody is going to be buying the market um, into the close Friday ahead of potentially more bad news. So, I think it's futile for the plunge protection team to try and stop this today. I think the selling will probably just overwhelm any efforts to stop the market at this point. And I'm now starting to lean more towards the 1987 type scenario as opposed to the one that I described in my last video where we get a bounce and then a second leg down. So let me convert to the weekly chart. So, I've mentioned many times in the past that, this looks like the 4-year cycle low. The problem, of course, is it came way too early. Uh, the last confirmed 4-year cycle low was right here in the beginning of 2016. So the normal timing band would be the beginning of 2020, which is where we're at right now. And this occurred, not even really, didn't even make it to 3 years, which was always a concern for me because it was very early. And so the Fed has set this up, and the coronavirus has given us the driver for the market to come back down and give us the 4-year cycle low in the more normal timing band, which is the beginning of this year. And that appears to be what's happening here. So my thought at this point is that the more likely scenario is probably, go back to the daily cycle, probably that this is just going to continue to collapse, snowball down and go more or less straight down to that 200-week moving average, and then we get some kind of a bounce off of that 200-week moving average, which is right around 2600, by the way, and then we get our bottom as the bounce rolls over, and we get our bottom as maybe a slight undercut, probably on the FOMC meeting, which is on the 18th of March. The Fed may shock everyone with a half-point cut instead of a quarter point, and that would probably give us our bottom. And then this is going to clear out the sentiment and pave the way for the next 10 years of this bull market. So ignore these idiots that are calling for another bull market, and this is going to be worse than 2009. This is not going to happen. This is probably going to be a mild recession, as everybody just kind of starts to panic about the coronavirus, and people start to lock themselves indoors, and they quit spending, and obviously China closing down is affecting supply chains all over the world. So my guess is that this just triggers a mild recession. That's what the market is doing. It would have done it. It would have discounted it normally, right here in early January if the market had been allowed to run naturally. It wasn't. The Fed pumped it up even more, stretched the market even further above the 200-week moving average, and then at some point, it's just there's no denying it anymore. The coronavirus is going to have an economic effect on the world, and so now the market's in the process of discounting it. And once we get down to that 200-week moving average, then the market will bottom, and probably do so a little ahead of the final economic low, which will, I would say the economic low will probably come in April or May, but the market will anticipate that ahead of time, so it will bottom slightly before the actual economic reversal occurs. So at this point, I've kind of given up on the scenario of a bounce and then a second leg down. I think we're probably just going to go straight down, kind of very similar to 1987. Find that bottom here, maybe early or mid next week, and then we get our little bounce, and then a retest and probably marginal undercut ahead of the FOMC meeting. And I think the odds are very high that we'll get our final bottom on the FOMC meeting on March 18th.